The drama begins by showing the protagonist Hyun-soo, who is a lonely and depressed man moving to an apartment called Green Home. There, he goes to the building's terrace where he planned to end his life. However, he is interrupted by his new neighbor named Junyu, who stops him from jumping, saying it would be harmful to the people in the building. Meanwhile, we see the building's security guard and his boss not treating him well. A resident arrives and gives him some fish to eat, but when he checks them, they are all rotten. Soon after, his nose starts bleeding and he begins to behave strangely. Other residents of the building are shown, including a lady whose daughter died in a hit and run. However, she hasn't overcome this trauma as she believes she is strolling with her daughter in a baby carriage. But when Jisoo looks at the carriage, he realizes it's empty. Another resident, Jae-hyun, appears and tells Jisoo not to be afraid as the woman was a good person. Now we meet the supposed villain of the series, Sang-wook, who is torturing a man tied up with tape. Back to the protagonist, Hyun-soo is called to test a beta version of a game he likes. So he decides to postpone his real-life game over plan until the beta is over. When he opens his apartment door to get his ordered ramen, he sees them scattered on the floor up to his neighbor's house. As he approaches, he is horrified to see the woman feeding on her own cat. He flees and locks himself in his apartment, followed by the woman who bangs on his door, trying to get in. Her nose starts bleeding and her eyes turn red. Unable to enter Hyun-soo's apartment, she is drawn to the noise coming from Jisoo's apartment next door. Fortunately, the door is also locked, preventing the woman from entering. Meanwhile, downstairs in the building, we see a firefighter trying to reach the building's management because the doors were locked and everyone was trapped inside. She tries to seek help over the phone, but all the lines were busy. When the door finally opens, we see a monster outside with a massive tongue. With the automatic doors open, it manages to grab one of the residents, with its tongue sucking him to death. With the help of a fire extinguisher and the bravery of the firefighter, they manage to lock the door with the monster outside. The residents see that the streets are overrun by monsters screaming that they are hungry for flesh. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo realizes that his nose is bleeding. Now, we see a bit of his sad past where he lost his family in a car accident. Since then, he has been in this state of depression. As it had been a while since he heard the woman banging on his door, he decides to go out to check but ends up fainting. When he wakes up, he sees Jisoo beside him. They look at the news and notice that the term monster was trending and everyone knew what was happening, but they didn't know why. They also discovered that before turning into a monster, the person's nose starts bleeding. In other words, Hyun-soo was infected. Sang-wook, the supposed villain of the series, was the one who rescued Hyun-soo and brought him to Jisoo. And now he has found a woman lying on the stairs, but is attacked and bitten by Hyun-soo's infected neighbor. However, he manages to defeat her using his brute strength. Arriving at the bottom of the building, the residents restrain him, fearing that he might turn into a monster because he was bitten. One of the monsters had part of its head cut off by a sword, causing it to lose its vision. However, its hearing improved significantly, and now it attacks anything that makes noise. Seeing it approaching, Hyun-soo tries to hold back from making any noise as the monster passes by him. Hyun-soo sees his neighbor hanging from the window, telling his children that he would go down to seek help. At that moment, a monster appears and knocks him down. To prevent the monster from reaching the children, Hyun-soo lures it away. With the help of a neighbor who had a weapon, he manages to defeat the monster. He then goes to the children and tries to take them to the house of the neighbor who had helped him. However, on the way there, Hyun-soo's nose starts bleeding. He begins to have hallucinations along with some flashbacks of his life. Additionally, we also see that he was in the car when the accident happened to his family. Hyun-soo feels guilty because his father got distracted while arguing with him in the car. Upon waking up, he sees that a monster was about to attack the children. Hyun-soo grabs the monster's leg and shouts for both of them to flee. Jisoo and Jae-hyun appear and manage to rescue Hyun-soo, but he asks them to go save the children. At that moment, we see that the children were surrounded because while running away from the monster that was chasing them, they encountered the monster with half its head missing. However, upon hearing the noise the first monster made, the second monster attacks it and they begin to fight. Since the first monster is much larger and stronger, it emerges as the winner and once again starts chasing the children. At this moment, Myung-suk, the lady with the baby carriage, steps in front to protect the children while remembering her daughter and the accident, finally overcoming her trauma. However, the monster ruthlessly attacks her. And at this moment, we see that she has also been infected and gained some abilities. The three of them appear to rescue the children and together they manage to throw the monster out of the window. Finally, they reach the house of the neighbor who had helped Hyun-soo earlier and we see that he is in a wheelchair. Meanwhile, the residents who were downstairs watch the news and see the president also transform live with the military being forced to eliminate him on the spot. At this moment, a woman says that she needs to fetch her daughter because she was not at home when all this happened. When her daughter returned running home, she opened the gate but the monster from earlier pierced the girl with its tongue. A soldier also died while trying to save her and the building residents were forced to close the door again. We see a home nurse named Yuri with her patient, an elderly man, planning to descend to where the other residents are. We learn that martial law has been imposed in the country and the military states that the infection does not spread through blood. Instead, it is related to human desire. They also advise that if someone is infected, they should be quarantined. If the person does transform, they should be killed immediately as the longer it takes, the harder it will be to kill the monster. Hyun-soo and the others descend to where the rest of the residents are, but are attacked by a fast monster and end up falling from a great height. And upon waking up, he finds himself surrounded by residents who now know he is infected because even after falling from that height, he woke up without any injuries. One of the building residents proposes a vote to expel Hyun-soo from the building, but the majority chooses not to expel him. The man becomes frustrated but at that moment, his nose also starts bleeding and both are placed in quarantine together. The man who is being held captive and tortured by Sang-wook manages to escape and upon encountering the residents, claims that he is also infected to be placed in quarantine and escape from Sang-wook. However, he doesn't realize that Sang-wook has already stolen the keys to his house and gone up there. In another scene, Hyun-soo's neighbor, Disik, is talking to the children who tell him that Myung-suk entered the bathroom and had been there for over an hour. He decides to check and sees that she had transformed into a monster that looks like a giant fetus. He decides not to kill her since she posed no threat and was confined to the bathroom. Back with the other residents, we see that Yoon-yu's brother, Yoon-hyuk, has become the leader of the people there. He plans to bring Disik down and fortify the gate. To achieve this, he wants to use Hyun-soo as a weapon. The residents discover through the internet that this may not be a virus, but rather a curse. The firefighter in the group, Lee-kyung, remembers that she had seen this website before with her husband who disguised it and started talking about their marriage to distract her. We see that Yuri, along with the old man she was taking care of, was still trying to descend to where the other residents were. Sang-wook was on his mission with Hyun-soo when a monster caught him, but he managed to escape after a fierce fight and joined Yuri and the old man. The residents placed a large cloth with an SOS outside to ask for help. Sang-wook finally reached the house of the man whose key he stole. There, he discovers that the man was actually a criminal who committed atrocities against children and kept photos of his victims at home. He becomes furious and goes after the guy. Seeing that his keys were missing, the criminal decides to leave quarantine and go after Sang-wook, who kills him with a hammer, throwing the body outside for the monster to devour. They take advantage of the situation to bring the lady's daughter's body inside as well as the soldier who tried to save her. Now, we find out that Sang-wook was hired by a man to find his missing daughter, which is the reason he came to this place. While the building residents trained to face the monsters if they entered, the man who wanted to expel Hyun-soo transforms. At that moment, his wife who had always been mistreated and scorned by him, decides to end him using a baseball bat, just as he apologizes for everything he did. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo performs some dangerous tasks and still doesn't transform into a monster but continues to have visions and hallucinations that try to lead him to the dark side. Lee-chan ends up being expelled from the building as Yoon-hyuk was not happy with her actions. She decides to go to where her husband worked and sees some information on his computer, showing that he was the first infected, trying to figure out what was happening and documenting everything on the website. At that moment, some military personnel appear and start asking her questions. She says she doesn't know anything, but the military ends up arresting her. In one of his missions, Hyun-soo ends up being captured by one of the monsters, but Sang-wook and the others manage to save him from that situation. A monster chases the little girl Hyun-soo had saved while in the parking lot. The group is attacked by another very fast monster. Hyun-soo manages to kill the creature that was attacking the little girl in Disik. However, to accomplish this, he ends up with black eyes, leaving the residents frightened by what they are seeing. After this confrontation, Disik has his wounds tended to, and everyone is fine for a while. Now we see that Ikkyung has been released by the military, because they wanted to find someone who could control this infection. Upon learning about Hyun-soo, they gave her a device to press when she is next to him and said that if someone is infected and manages to go 15 days without turning into a monster, the person will be fine in the end. As food was becoming scarce, the residents planned to go up to the apartments to get more supplies, and Sang-wook was in charge of this mission. Meanwhile, Disik made some modifications to a car so they could leave the building without major concerns. However, not everything was fine as Jisoo started to get very sick and experienced severe pain, even fainting. As Yoonhyuk was a medical student, upon examining Jisoo, he saw that she had appendicitis and needed urgent surgery, but there was a chance she could die during the operation. However, she agrees to proceed. They set up a specific area for this, and the group prepared to go to the hospital to get anesthesia and some medical instruments for the surgery. Under Sang-wook's command, the group sets out on the mission to go to the hospital. But as they were leaving, a giant monster hits the car, throwing them away. Now we see that Ikkyung has returned to the building with a truck and managed to throw the monster into a ravine, flipping the truck over it. Meanwhile, Sang-wook rescues Yuri, who was severely injured in the accident. With no more time, Yoonhyuk had to start the surgery even without anesthesia, or it would be too late. Ikkyung calls the group leader, Yoonhyuk, to talk and tells him everything that happened. Meanwhile, a soldier appeared in the building saying he was very thirsty and hungry, and the group kept an eye on him. Jisoo wakes up from her surgery and sees that Hyun-soo is by her side now with a haircut. Outside that room, the soldier says he shouldn't be there. He hears a voice on his radio from other men looking for him and panics. Meanwhile, the woman who was mistreated by her husband begins to show symptoms of infection as well. Ikkyung tells her that the first 5 days will be the worst, but if she can endure that, it will get easier later on. If she can survive and go through the 15 days without transforming, she will be cured. But she needs to get through the first 5 without turning. Hyun-soo and Sang-wook had to remove the cloth with the SOS as it could result in more soldiers coming to that place. On the way back, they encountered the building's security guard who had transformed, and he had been in the elevator all this time. Hyun-soo tries to prevent the elevator from reaching where the residents are with the monster, but he doesn't arrive in time. So Jaehyun decides to confront the monster to save the people there. Even losing an arm in the fight, he doesn't give up and uses his sword to hold the monster and take it to the elevator, where he decides to sacrifice himself for the group by instructing them to set the elevator on fire with him and the monster inside. Now we see the group holding a funeral in respect to all those who died in that building. The soldier who seemed to be running from some people ends up meeting some criminals who kill him. Later, these same men invade the building, making all the residents hostages inside a red circle. Sang-wook and Ikkyung manage to escape and together kill some of the criminals and take their weapons. The residents react and also attack the criminals. However, even after a chaotic battle, the leader of the criminals manages to regain control of the situation. And when he turns around, he sees the woman who was in quarantine now transformed into a monster. Unfortunately, instead of attacking the criminals, she attacks Hyun-soo, who is forced to kill her with his own hands. The leader of the criminals goes to the rooftop with Hyun-soo and his henchmen. He tries to kill Hyun-soo but fails as he instantly recovers. At that moment, one of the criminals betrays him and pushes him from the top of the building. He also reveals to be infected just like the protagonist. At this moment, some pamphlets start falling from the sky as a helicopter passes by dropping them. The pamphlets state that the military is taking people with information about infected individuals to a safe location. Upon returning inside the building, they are surrounded by the residents who point their guns at the man who was with the criminals. Hyun-soo manages to calm them down, but they remain suspicious. The man talks about his past and how he was a subject in experiments, but nothing worked. He grew tired of the situation, killed everyone, and claims that monsters and humans cannot coexist. We see that Do-sik was transforming while Sang-wook runs with Yuri on his back as she was having an asthma attack and her medication had run out. So he tries to take her to the hospital. But at that moment, the infected man who was with the criminals attacks him. However, after some conversation, he lets them go only to shoot Yuri in the back. This enrages Hyun-soo, who transforms completely and uses his powers to attack and kill the man. Seeing that Hyun-soo was out of control, Do-sik sacrifices himself to bring him back. Meanwhile, we see Sang-wook outside with Yuri by his side, lifeless. Sometime later, snow begins to fall and the military arrives at the building. The group manages to escape through an exit they found below the building as the military is shooting at everything that moves up there. Hyun-soo decides to surrender and Hyun-hyuk reveals to his sister that he is infected and will stay on top of the building to give the others time to escape from there. In the end, we see Hyun-soo being shot by the military while the people who had escaped through the tunnels ended up being caught by the army. In the last scene, we see that Hyun-soo survived and like the others, he is being taken to a different location while we see South Korea completely destroyed by the monsters. Here ends the drama. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and check out our other selection of recaps.